It's nice to be here. I want to talk, I guess it's not this morning, it's early afternoon, about the work I've been doing for the last several years, weave several different things together that have to do with achievement gaps. But I want to start with a poem. I've been working with schools, and I've found that it's useful. I have a little collection of poems for teachers that serve as an icebreaker often, and sometimes make people think about things they don't want to think about. But the first one I'm going to start with it's the only one I'm going to do probably, is just a poem to describe what things are like a lot of the time to what things could be like for kids in schools. It's called Transformation. I started kindergarten 2 or 3 big steps behind. Some classmates understood things that had never crossed my mind. The kids who looked real different seemed so smart, I can recall. Those who looked and spoke like I did didn't seem so smart at all. Of course, there were exceptions. But on mostly any day, it was clear those kids were doing best, and we were just okay. Our teachers liked them better because they always knew the answers. So kids like me just tried to be good athletes and great dancers. The years went by quite slowly. Most things just stayed the same. Till our principal decided it was time to change the game. She hinted that the reason when those other kids did best was that many knew already more of what was on the test. They learned it from their parents and from things they did at home, much that I and my companions never had the chance to know. That had always been the pattern. Yes, for years it was the same. But the standards movement came along to finally change the game. Now that there's a new prescription for the way our school is run, everybody's got new goals to reach. It's getting to be fun. We're learning to get smarter. Our teachers show us how. They're all serious about it. Everyone's important now. Time in class is so exciting that we seldom fool around. We might make a joke in passing, but we quickly settle down. After school, we do our homework, often in our study groups. When we need them, we have tutors, and they give us all the scoops. If there's something that's confusing, it's a temporary thing because the teachers love to answer all the questions that we bring. All the counselors and teachers work with parents as a team because they share the same commitment to connect us with our dreams. I love the way things are now. It all just seems so right. We still play sports, and we still cool. But now, we're also bright. That first day of kindergarten, some of us were way behind. But today, I'm graduating in a truly different time. And so each stanza of that poem has a different issue in it. And I won't take the time now to review it, but it can be used for discussions and so on. I may end with another poem, but where I want to start is just to talk a little bit about why are we so concerned about achievement gaps. A decade ago, not many people were talking about these things in public, even if they were thinking about it. But now, No Child Left Behind has subgroup identifiers in it, and everybody's talking about narrowing achievement gaps. Well, there are a few different reasons, some of which are listed here on the screen. One is that it's not narrowly racial, but since the mid-1970s, the economy has shifted in a manner such that folks that have weak basic reading and math skills, typically folks with 12 or fewer years of schooling, in other words, high school graduations or less, have had falling real incomes. The purchasing power has been falling. What you can buy with the take-home pay, if you're a male with no more than a high school education, has declined 25% or more since the mid-1970s. For women, it's about the same as it was in the mid-1970s, but it was pretty low at that time. So the only folks that have had rising take-home pay in real purchasing power terms since the mid-1970s have been folks with college educations. Okay, and it's partly the degree that matters, but it's more the basic skills that matter. Jobs that can be done by folks that don't have basic skills are either overseas or being done by a machine or don't pay very much. There just aren't many jobs now that pay a middle-class wage to folks who don't have the kinds of skills that we get from school. So if we want to be the kind of society that gives people from all kinds of backgrounds access to middle-class lifestyles, we've got to be the kind of society that gives people from all kinds of backgrounds strong reading and math skills. That's a piece of it. But even more important than that, as a reason that we're paying so much attention to race in the context of education these days, is that the racial composition of the United States is changing. By the middle of this century, projections indicate that there will be no racial majority group in the United States. Even whites will be a minority group. the majority of the population, the majority of the workforce will be non-white. And so the vitality of the economy, the position of the United States in international affairs will be shaped by the quality of the education that we give to black and brown children now and in the next several generations. Nations rise, they peak, and they decline. For most of the United States, for most of the time the United States has been a nation, we've had rising education levels, rising skill levels in our workforce. We've gotten to the place where we're going into a period where we may have falling average skill levels, because the groups with the lowest skill levels are the groups that are most rapidly growing in the society. So to have the kind of society as we want to have going forward, to leave the kind of nation that we want to leave to our kids, we've got to go to a place we've never been. We've got to have kids from black and Latino and Native American backgrounds performing consistently at levels that we've never seen those kinds of kids perform at on an average level. They've been individuals that are exceptions to the rules, but we've got to take lots of kids to higher levels if we're going to maintain the value of the 401ks that are the folks that are currently in their mid-careers. And so it's in everybody's interest now to try to raise the achievement levels of all kinds of kids. And we frame it as achievement gap issues, and there are ways that it really matters as a gap, but it also matters as a level. Okay, we don't want to narrow gaps by holding any group back, because if we're going to be internationally competitive, we got to have our best kids have to be equal or better than the best any place in the world. But we just got to pull the bottom up faster than the top rises without holding the top back is the challenge that we face. The reason it matters as a gap, the reason it's not enough to just say we have to move everybody along, is if you imagine as a society where non-whites are the majority, but racial inequality is as great as it is today. And think about the political dynamics in that society. What it would be like if blacks and Latinos collectively are the majority, have a race consciousness, and think the game is rigged in favor of whites. Okay? That we don't all have equal and fair access to opportunity and advantage in the society. Well, majorities can start changing the rules. Okay? And it can lead to a very strange instability in the political sphere, in the social sphere. And Malaysia, Chinese are dominant with a dominant minority. It's just a very messy politics. Okay, and if we don't want to leave that to our kids, and some of you are young enough that you'll be in the middle of it when it's really heating up, we need to fix it now. We've got a couple generations to try to get it right and catch up. And I want to suggest to you the proposition that we can make a lot of progress in narrowing gaps is a plausible proposition. But we have to do it and get the work done. So I'm going to show you a few charts that just talk about the size of the gaps that exist. And then move past it. I'll talk about some of this as I show you some things. These are SAT scores. It's about a 100-point gap on the verbal and the math between blacks and whites. We get the Latino groups over here, very similar levels. The Asians in math are the highest. They're a little bit behind whites in reading and verbal. But you get, anyway, those kinds of gaps on the SAT. These are Nape scores, National Assessment of Educational Progress, nationally representative, 1994 for 12th graders. The reason I'm using this, it's old data, 1994. There are more recent data out. But this is the only published one I found that breaks it out by parents' education. I think there's some unpublished data that do this. And there's a fact on this chart that I find kind of embarrassing, and I don't always present, but I throw it out here just to indicate how big the gap is, and it's really a racial gap and not just a socioeconomic gap. Okay? If you look at the scores of black kids who say their parents are college educated and compare that to the scores of white kids who say their parents are high school dropouts, who's got the higher test scores on this chart? Black kids who say their parents are college educated and black college educated, white high school dropout. These are 12th grade reading scores from 1994. Okay? It's not just the socioeconomic. It's not just, rich versus poor folks. There really are racial dynamics of this. One's 272, 274 going across there. Now, all the numbers aren't that extreme, but these are the math scores here. These are for 17-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 9-year-olds. You often, when people try to talk about the magnitude of the achievement gap, they'll often give you the comparison between black 17-year-olds and white 13-year-olds. Blacks are basically 4 years behind. 4 years behind in terms of the magnitude of the scores. This is the reading scores. There we see the same relationship between black 17-year-olds and white 13-year-olds. Black 13-year-olds are ahead of white 9-year-olds. So it's the teenage years, though, when you get that 4-year relationship. These are the trends in black kids' scores in the Nape from 1971 through 2004 here. If I were to show you this, and this is just reading. If I showed you the reading diagram for white kids, they're basically flat lines for this entire period. White kids' reading scores of 17-year-olds have been pretty much the same place since the early 1970s. For the younger kids in reading, there was some progress during the 1970s for whites, and then they were pretty flat since then in the reading scores in the Nape. In math, there's been more progress for white kids in math, steady progress since the early 1970s in math scores. Blacks were rising faster than whites were in the 80s, and we narrowed the gap in math during the 80s. But then blacks leveled off, and whites kept going up, so the math gap started to rise again after the 80s. But the point I want to make here, this diagram is set up in a way that you can read vertically within birth cohort. They don't survey the same, they don't go back to exactly the same kids every year, but they go back to the kids who were born around the same time. And so kids who were born in 1971 were 9 in 1980, 13 in 1984, and 17 in 1988. For white kids, if I had these lines up, you see they're basically parallel lines. It doesn't much matter when you were born. The gains over a 4-year interval are about the same. For black kids, that's not true. It is true for the 9 to 13-year-olds. Those are pretty much parallel lines. And for most birth cohorts, the black kids gain slightly more than the whites between ages 9 and 13 in the Nape. It's only one birth cohort where the whites have gained more than the blacks. It's a very slight narrowing between basically 4th grade and 8th grade for most birth cohorts. But then the teenage years, during the 1970s, the gains were very small. During the 80s, they opened up. And then at the end of the 80s, got really small again. This gain from 84 to 88 is about as big as any birth cohort white, black, or Latino ever makes. These gains during the 70s and then from 88 to 92 are smaller than Hispanics or whites ever have. I should also point out for Hispanics, the gap did also narrow. The same time it narrowed for blacks between 1970 and 1990. But then they stopped rising also around the same time that blacks stopped rising. So we get this pattern where during some birth cohorts, the teenage years don't show much progress. Other birth cohorts, big progress during the teenage years. And among the things worth trying to understand are why. Why do we get that kind of variation? If I had the white line up here, this 0 line up there is pegged where white kids were in 1976, which is pretty much where they were the whole time. So you can measure the achievement gap for 17-year-olds in reading by looking at the distance from this red line up to the diagonal, because I've scaled this to make this is where the white kids line was. And you'll see here, from 1971 up to there, it is about almost 3 times from 88 up to there. It's about a 62% reduction, almost 2/3 reduction in the reading score gap in a 17-year period between 1971 and 1988. There's some methodological issues with the measurement, but generally this establishes the plausibility of the proposition that progress is possible. Okay, this is pretty dramatic narrowing in a pretty short period of time. And it turns out that same pattern shows up in the SAT scores. It's not just an artifact of the Nape. And I think I stuck the SAT slide in here. So again, from this gap down to roughly that gap right there. And we see part of what's going on is changes in the gains during the teenage years. If we could take the gain from 1984 to 88 and sit it on top of 1988, the kids who were 13 and 88, they gained the same amount. We'd be about where the red dot was, right here. And then if we could just continue that on, we would have closed the gap in reading by now. Okay. Now, notice that the birth cohort where this gain was very small from 88 to 92, it was for the kids who had the biggest gains, who were at the highest we've ever been at age 13. Okay, so it was a black birth cohort that even to this day has had the highest scores as 13-year-olds that black kids have ever had. The 2004 number is almost back up to where the 1988 number was for the 13-year-olds. And it was those kids who, as 13-year-olds, were our stars. They'd done as well as we'd ever done during their teenage years. They didn't get much done. And that's when the progress stopped. And the big, interesting question is why? And I'm going to give you a speculation in a second. But these are the SAT scores, math on the bottom, reading on the top. And I just want to point out that during the 1980s, like from 1980 to roughly 1988, there too we get that big run-up in scores, and then it stops right around the same time. It doesn't turn down like the Nape did, but it stopped rising. The SAT are not as representative as the Nape is. But we see in both these data series, the progress happened at the same time and stopped around the same time. Now, there appears to have been a behavior shift nationally among black youth at the end of the 1980s. This diagram is class attendance. There's a huge survey done every year at University of Michigan to measure drug use. And they ask about class attendance and a few other things. Between 1980 and 88, class attendance for black kids rose in every region of the country. This is the proportion of African American 12th graders who report that they never cut class by major census region. So between 1980 and 88, it rose in every region. It peaked in 1984 in the South, but it was still higher than it was in 1980. Between 1988 and 92, it fell in every region. So we get this national behavior problem, so to speak, behavior pattern, where it's better and better during the 80s when test scores are rising, peaked in 88, and fell to 92. It tracks the pattern in the test scores. After 92, it kept going down in the West, but it started back up in the other regions. Also, this diagram, the top 4 lines are just the reading lines, showing that the pattern in reading was the same as in each of the 4 major census regions as it was in the diagram I showed you a minute ago. Between 1984, reading scores rose for black kids, black 17-year-olds in every region of the country. It fell to 1992 and then started slowly back up after that. It's that same segment that I showed you a little while ago. The bottom line, the purple line, is leisure reading. It's percent who read daily for pleasure. It was 30% in 84 for blacks, whites, and Latinos. All 3 groups of roughly 30% of the kids said they read every day or almost every day for pleasure. Whites stayed right around 30% till about 1994. Then they dipped some. Hispanics, the data in the middle are missing, but they're close to where blacks are. But in the middle years, the data for Hispanics are missing. But this went from 30% for blacks in 1984 up to 35% by 1988, down to 14.7% by 1992, and started slowly back up. So that 4-year period when, for that birth cohort that didn't gain much after they were age 13, and so that led us to have those drops in scores from 1988 to 92. The older kids were reading a lot more than the younger were in terms of just leisure reading as they're reporting it. We get that really big drop-off. So this behavior shift shows up in the class attendance patterns, it shows up in the leisure reading, and it exactly tracks the reading score patterns at the end of the 1980s. Okay, and if I showed you the data for whites, it's a totally different pattern. And actually, for white kids, the reading scores tip up just a little bit between 1988 and 92. Not much, but just the opposite direction. Their class attendance patterns, class attendance peaks in 1983 and then kind of moves around some. Their leisure reading is flat through this period. They're nationally distinct youth cultures, apparently, that show up in these data. Now, We don't know, for example, why. We don't know exactly why we get this behavior pattern nationally at the end of the 80s. But there is one very interesting coincidence in time where that leads you to be able to tell a time use story. And that essentially is that 1988 was the commercial takeoff of hip-hop. There were only 3 gold records in hip-hop before 1988. There were 17 in 1988, and by 1992 there had been 134. So during the teenage years of those kids who were 13 in 1988, there was this fascinating new cultural phenomenon that took time because it was a complicated music. You couldn't master it with a superficial engagement. And I've talked to kids who were in those birth cohorts, and they said you felt like you had to memorize every word of every song. When they hear me give this talk sometime, they want to argue with me. They'd never like the story because it blames their youth culture. And I acknowledge I may be totally wrong. It's just coincidence in time. I'm telling a story that's kind of interesting. But after they finish arguing with me, we talk about their personal stories, and their personal stories tend to reinforce my story, usually. One young man said, it wasn't hip-hop, that's just the year we got our Walkmans. And I said, because he was 13 in 1988, and I said, well, what'd you do with your Walkmans? He said, we take them to school in a backpack. After school, we slap the headphones on. The rest of the night, we listen to music. I said, what were you listening to? Well, hip-hop. Another girl said, it wasn't hip-hop, but I do remember I was in 3 extracurricular activities that all involved hip-hop. I was in a drum corps, I was in a dance group, and she was in something else. And she ended it by saying, and sometime I even went to class, which gets you the class-cutting piece of it. And so it was a complicated music. You could listen to Motown once and hum along when I was growing up. You can't even hear the lyric the first time when you listen to a lot of hip-hop stuff. And you're going to study it and master it and get to know, become expert at the artist. It just takes some time investment. And I don't see a lot of changes in time on homework during this period. So it's not that they weren't doing their school homework, but it's their extracurricular activities may have been of the types that didn't necessarily augment their academic skills. And so I could be totally wrong about this. The main point that I've made so far is that there was a lot of progress in the 1970s and 80s, particularly during the 1980s, that establishes the plausibility of the proposition that progress is possible. The other piece of evidence that I should throw in here is there's some brand new unpublished evidence that the black-white IQ gap is narrowing. Bill Dickens at Brookings Institution and a guy named Jim Flynn have looked at the IQ norming test. Okay, the test that they use to norm IQ exams. They've looked at 4 different exams, and they say that the black-white IQ gap has narrowed by between a third and a fifth between 1972 and 2002. Over the 20th century, the white IQ level rose by more than can be explained by biologic change. Okay, the IQ test measures skills. Skills are acquired partly through biology, but partly through experience. And so these are flexible things we're dealing with here, these skills. We just have to get the job done. None of us knows what the possibilities are. We'll only discover them by trying to do the work with energy over a long period of time. Allow me to avoid taking questions right now because I've got things that are even more interesting to tell you that you have more questions about. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, change the subject here. I want to talk about a little bit about classrooms and teachers and what some of the issues are, a little bit more about youth culture, and a little bit about parenting. Because if we're really going to deal effectively with the achievement gap, we've got to work on a lot of fronts. We've got to deal with some things that some people don't want to deal with. Okay? And part of the challenge is trying to tell people, to tell parents, to tell teachers, it's not good enough. Okay? Maybe you've been feeling like you've been doing your best, but we got to take it to a different level. Okay? Now, so some things out of classrooms. I surveyed teachers and students in classrooms, and I'm going to show you some stuff out of the elementary schools. It's about 500 classrooms, mostly inner suburbs, very racially integrated places. And I take classrooms and I put them into 4 boxes, depending upon 2 kinds of things. One is where the kids believe their teacher loves to help them. Okay, and this is just 3 different ways of asking you, does your teacher love to help you? All right. And I combine all these three. Teacher likes it when I ask questions. It's nice to me when I ask questions. It's happy to help me with my work. I combine all those into one number that I call help. Another is how much a teacher harps on getting stuff right. In our class, it's very important to get everything correct. In our class, getting right answers is very important. Combine that into one number I call perfectionism. And then I define 4 kinds of classes depending upon whether you're above or below average on these 2 things, on help and perfectionism. So you can be high help, high perfectionism, low help, low perfectionism, or you can be high on one, low on the other. Okay? So you got one kind of class where our teacher seems like she doesn't really want to help us, but at least she doesn't harp on it when we don't get stuff right. Okay? You have another class where our teacher loves to help us when we don't understand things, but she says we're never really done till we know how to do it all the way the right way. You got another class where our teacher loves to help us when we don't understand things, and she doesn't get all upset about it or worry about it when we don't get it right. And then we have a class where our teacher's always talking about we got to get stuff right, but it seems like she doesn't really want to help us. Okay? And then we want to know, well, what difference does it make that you're in one of those kinds of classes or another? And we want to know, does the teacher believe the kids want to learn? So here I have the index called, and I should point out that I'm going to show you these things for 3 different racial categories. One is classrooms that are no more than 25% white or Asian. So it's mostly black kids and Hispanics and mixed race kids. Classrooms that are 25 to 50% white or Asians, and classrooms that are majority white and Asian. Within each of those 3 brackets, there's not the socioeconomic stuff does not break out cleanly across these categories. So as I show you stuff, there's not a lot of socioeconomic difference depending upon which kind of classroom you're in after we've adjusted for the racial composition of the classroom. And you'll see how that works. Here's slackers. Does the teacher think the kids want to learn? Ask how many of your students seem not to care enough about doing well, avoid seeking help when they need it, because of effort don't finish their work, and make excuses for not doing their work even when the work is easy. Okay, and teachers can, for how many, they can say one, a few, no, none, 1 or 2, a few, about a third of my class, more than a third of my class are the choice options here. So that's one thing, slackers. What does the teacher think about the kids? Classmate collegiality, what do the kids think about the kids in terms of academic support? Kids help each other learn, help each other if they make a mistake. Those are both positives. Kids tell you when they do better than you, or tease kids who make mistakes. Those are both negatives. This classmate collegiality is the sum of these first 2 minus these second 2, essentially. That gives you one number for how much kids support each other. Now, one thing to mention, this teasing, I'm going to just point out one thing about that. It was one of the fascinating findings in the stuff was that teasing is high beginning in the 1st grade for making mistakes. And there's more teasing for making mistakes than there is for being smart. Okay? It's a pro-achievement negative peer dynamic. Okay, it's pro-achievement, but it's still negative. It's pernicious. The answer to the teasing question helps to predict the answer to a question that's, I worry I might not do as well as my classmate. Okay, worry is anxiety. Anxiety interferes with concentration. So beginning in 1st grade, we've got a peer dynamic that's interfering with concentration. And it's most pernicious when there are more black kids in the classroom. And this is 55% of the kids in 1st grade classrooms that are no more than 25% white or Asian answer yes. Some classmates tease kids who make mistakes, and it goes up slightly through 5th grade. For majority white and Asian classrooms, it's up high 30s and trends down toward low 30s. It's about 2 to 1 at 5th grade. Okay. And so among the things schools need to work on that I talk to about these things, I give schools their own data, the results back, is you need to work at the teasing thing, the peer dynamics. It's not an anti-achievement thing. It's almost a pro-achievement, but it's still negative. Okay. Now, here, classmate collegiality. The red is low perfection, low help. The blue is high perfection, low help. Then yellow is low perfection, high help, and the checkerboard is high perfection, high help. The least collegial classrooms, from the kids' perspective, are those where they don't think the teacher likes to help them, but the teacher also doesn't hold them to a very high standard. Okay, those are these are standard deviations. It's minus 0.8 standard deviations. That's a big effect size in social science. And particularly if you compare minus 0.8 to positive 0.6, that's 1.4 standard deviations difference between being in a classroom where the teacher doesn't like to help you and it's mostly non-white kids, all the way to a classroom where the teacher loves to help you and it's mostly white and Asian kids over here. But we'll see here that for the white and Asian, majority white and Asian classroom, perfectionism doesn't seem to make much difference. It's mainly help. These two, the teacher loves to help. They're above average on help. These two are below average on help. Okay. Whereas over here, both matter. Okay. If you take away either help or perfection, you take a step down for these kids. Coming from these households, the teacher needs to say, nope, we're not done till it's right, more often. Now, again, this is what the kids think of each other. This is a slackers index. And one of the things I like to do is this. Wait a minute. If I can get it right. This is what the kids think of the kids. This is what the teachers think of the kids. Okay, and these differences are not being explained by socioeconomic differences. I mean, I've got for the elementary school kids, I've got who the adults are that they live with, so I know 2-parent, step-parent, 1-parent, and so on. I've got how many computers there are in the house. I've got how many siblings live with them, so I can control for those kinds of things. And so if I've got kids who think our teacher doesn't seem like she wants to help us, but at least she doesn't hassle us about getting stuff right, that's this big red bar down here. Those teachers think my kids don't ask for help when they need it. They make excuses for not doing their work. They don't do their work because they don't try. Those kinds of things. There's one difference between these two charts that's interesting to point out, which is at this position right here. This still looks a lot worse than over here. But this looks pretty much just as good as those. If we've got a teacher who thinks, if we've got kids who believe our teacher loves to help us and holds us to a high standard, that teacher believes these kids want to learn just as much as these teachers over here think that their kids want to learn. Okay. Now, part of what I figured out over the last several years from doing this work and looking at these data is that a teacher can't offer a whole lot of help if the teacher doesn't have pretty good explanations. So this is not just about relationships. Okay? This is a teacher has got to be able to diagnose what kids' misunderstandings are and clear them up when kids ask the help. Okay? So it's not just what the teacher wants to do, it's what the teacher has the capacity to do also. It's very difficult to get the relationship piece right if the teacher doesn't themselves have the content and pedagogy in their head. But they also have to care enough to work hard enough to be in the right boxes here. So this whole piece I've talked about so far is just to make the point that there's work to do in teaching. If you were to guess which of these bars on this end have the most classrooms in them and the most kids in them, the red, the blue, the yellow, or the checkerboard, what would you guess? Pardon? The red? It's the blue. 37% are in the blue bar over here. Okay, it's the modal category. The teacher who says we've got to get everything right but seems like she doesn't want to help us. Okay, 23% are in the checkerboard. So you got slightly less than a 1 in 4 chance of ending up in this classroom over here. On the majority white and Asian class, which one do you think is modal? Has the most in it? It's the yellow. The high help, low perfectionism. Our teacher loves to help us and doesn't worry about it and get all upset when we don't get stuff right. 46% are in that one bar over there. So you got a teacher who's cheerful and happy and doesn't hassle and get upset when you don't get stuff right. Or you got a teacher who's frazzled and doesn't seem like she wants to help and is always pushing you to get stuff right. And you can imagine, you got different kids and different backgrounds that contribute to those differences. But there are differences, and they do have consequences. But let me move on. There are other things I want to talk about. So this is teaching. Let me see. Let me point out one other thing here.
What grades are those?
This is elementary, 1st through 5th grade. Yeah, it's 1st through 5th combined. Remember the chart I showed back here? This one, it's all these kids. Okay. And the patterns, I mean, the phenomena are there in the first grade. You see it passes all the way through. You see these teasing differences and so on. I have a question. I will do my best work in this class all year long. I asked that question in the fall. 80% or more of all good groups of kids agree with that. I'm going to do my best all year. These are the non-white classrooms. These are the white classrooms, pretty much. And these are the 4 kinds of classrooms, from the low help, low perfectionism all the way. Doesn't matter. They all say, I'm going to do my best all year long. Go back in the spring, survey them again. See how many says, I have done my best all year long. It looks like this. You can ignore that high spike right there. There are very few kids in that one. But on this side, all these other ones are less than 50%. Or 50, that one's right about 50. They say, I have done my best all year long. The only one that's still up near 70 is that type 4 classroom, the high help, high perfectionism. The kids in the majority white classrooms look a bit better, but even there it's highest in the high help, high perfectionism classroom. If I take the difference between I will do and I have done to get the drop off from the fall to the spring, I get this diagram where the height, the taller it is, the bigger the drop off fall to spring. If you want to have a small drop off and you got mostly non-white kids, you got to have a type 4 classroom. Is what we're finding on the elementary side. Take away either help or perfectionism, and you moved away from this type 4, and you're back up to one of these bigger drop-offs from the fall to the spring. So if we want to sustain high effort all the way through, so by the end of the year, kids will say, I did my best all year, they need a teacher who loves to help them and holds them to a high standard. Okay, if you think, is integration a good thing? Well, it depends. The yellow bars are black kids. So S is a good thing for black kids. These yellow bars over here are black kids drop off in classrooms where they're the minority. It's more than half white or Asian. Those bars are smaller drop off than these 3 up here. But they're bigger drop off than this one over here. So if the black kids are going to be in a classroom, a mostly black classroom where the teacher doesn't love to help and holds them to a high standard, they're better off, in terms of persistence terms, being over with the white kids. But if they're going to be in a classroom where the teacher's going to hold them to really high standards and love to help them, then the drop-off is least when they're over with the black kids, over with the kids like them in a homogeneous classroom with a teacher who's going to town, so to speak. Okay, there's some methodological details we could get into, but even after we argued through those, the basic point would remain that I'm making here. Now, there's some things about youth culture and some things about parenting. I'm going to jump over the youth culture a minute and jump to the parenting issues. Since time is short. Okay. Among the most difficult things to work on as we try to narrow achievement gaps are going to be parenting. I mean, the achievement gap is in place by kindergarten. By the first day the kids show up, there's already a gap there. And schools can function in ways that widen that gap or narrow that gap. Okay? But if we're going to really get the job done, we got to get it done in all the various venues where kids spend time. You know, at home and after school programs, at Sunday school, at school. And a lot of parents are already doing the best they can. At least they feel like they're doing the best they can. There are other things they could be doing. There are different ways they could be doing things. But it's hard to change lifestyles. Okay? It's also hard to hear it when somebody tells you you're not good enough, that you're not doing it well enough, and you've already done everything everybody's told you to do and think you're doing your best. Let me just talk a little bit about how big some of the differences are in parenting things. We haven't really established the magnitude of the impacts of all these things well, but just to give you a taste of it, in the early childhood longitudinal study, nationally representative, although there's a new study also with nationally representative data that doesn't find exactly the same results on everything, so the details of the sample still matter, but this pattern I'm going to show you here tends to show up in one way or another in most of these kinds of surveys. These are books in the home. The question is, how many children's books does your kindergarten child have in your home now, including library books? And I've got them graphed by the mother's years of education. So first is black mothers who have 12 or fewer years of schooling, black mothers who have 13 to 15 years of schooling, black mothers who have 16 or more, that's a college degree, white mothers who have 12 or fewer, notice those have the same height, 16 or more, 12 or fewer, white mothers who have 13 to 16, and white mothers who have 16 or more. And this is books in the home for preschool kids. I find the same pattern in the surveys I do of high school kids, and I ask them how many books do they think there are at home, and I have them guessing categories. The black kids who say their parents have college degrees give me basically the same number as the white kids who say their parents have high school degrees or less. Okay, so home intellectual climate is an issue. Surveys of the kindergarten, same kinds of surveys that the earlier stuff I showed you came from. Lately I've added some things about home. My parents want me to tell them what I learned in school. Now here, the Asians look worst. Because kids can say yes, maybe, or no. The striped are no, the blue are yes, or maybe, and the black are yes. Blacks, whites, and Hispanics aren't that different from one another with regard to where the kids say, my parents want to know what I learned in school. Parents feel like they're engaged. They're asking the questions. Oh, what did you learn in school today? Also, at home, someone is always there to help me with my homework if I need it. Again, blacks, whites, Hispanics, somebody's there to help with homework. Asians look the worst. And you look at these things, that's surprising. You thought Asians were the ones that were really into stuff and were doing the best in school, the model minority stuff, and so on. Well, I read almost every day at home. Who's the highest on that? Who's the lowest on that? Okay, so parents, what'd you do in school? What'd you learn today? Here, you have homework. Let's get your homework done. But now, do they then say, now go read for half an hour? Okay, so Asians are the highest, blacks are the lowest, followed by Hispanics, then whites, and then Asians. At home, I watch television more than I do anything else. Who's the lowest, who's the highest here? 13% of Asians say yes. 32% of blacks, almost a third of black kids, say, yep, I watch TV more than I do anything else. 62% of the Asians say no. Not maybe, but just no. It's not right. Only 45% of the blacks say no. So lifestyle issues. Percentages of televisions or computers in their bedroom. Asians are the only group more likely to have a computer in the bedroom than a television. And when you unbundle this, it's only the non-free lunch Asians. It's only the advantaged Asians that are more likely to have a computer. Even the disadvantaged Asians are more likely to have a TV than a computer in the bedroom. Okay, 82% of black kids, and this does not vary by whether the kids are advantaged or not. All from poor black kids all the way to the more well-to-do black kids, 80% TVs in the bedrooms. Latinos, 70% TVs in the bedrooms. Then you get down to 41% for whites and 37% for Asians. Okay. On many days I get very sleepy at school. Who's getting sleepy at school and who's not getting sleepy at school? Okay. 12% of the Asians say, yep, I get sleepy. 34% of black kids say, yep, I get sleepy. Now, why? We don't know. I didn't ask that question. But what do you do to avoid being sleepy? You go to bed on time. Right. Now, maybe you also have good nutrition. There may be other things that are in there. If you get bored or frustrated, you might get sleepy. But bedtime. Think about things we need to do, prescriptions, narrow the achievement gap. Make sure your kid gets enough sleep. Okay, even if I'm wrong here, you won't do much harm by that. Right? You're not going to do much harm with the leisure reading. You're not going to do much harm with getting enough sleep. All those kinds of things could be at least part of what we need to do a little bit more. And I would just, if you are sleepy at school, you also may not pay attention enough. Sometimes my teacher says I don't pay attention like I should. And therefore, there you get black kids are highest, and Hispanic kids, then white kids, then Asian kids. About teachers saying you don't pay attention like you should. Now you say, oh, the teachers are saying that because they're racially biased. And it's not fair. They just can't get along. They don't know how to discipline the kids. Maybe there's some of that here. But maybe it's also the kids are just kind of sleepy. at times. Okay. So there are a number of issues that have to do with parenting and patterns in parenting practices, and it's hard to change those. Okay. It's also hard to talk about them in public. I mean, I do it enough that it's not hard for me anymore to do it. But yesterday I gave a talk. Elizabeth, New Jersey is one of the places. It's a low-income, mostly Latino school district. All about a quarter or more of the kids are black. I gave a talk to principals yesterday morning and to parent liaisons yesterday afternoon. And I didn't show this last piece to the teachers, but I showed it to the parent liaisons. And someone wanted to argue with me about it. Oh, but what, because it's stigmatizing, some of it. And so, but I fight back. And so at the end of it, we all agreed, and they were happy because I complimented them on some of their work. But one of the issues I was going to point out is, a Latino woman came over to me at the end of it after it was over, and she said, if you'd been white or Latino, you would have gotten killed. And she said, but I'm glad you said it because people need to hear it. But it was true. I mean, there were two women in particular, two African-American women, who, if I hadn't pushed back hard, would have flattened me for raising these issues. And one in particular actually had a community program where she was serving kids on Saturdays with enrichment, math tutoring, and so on. And I had pointed out here, well, if everybody was doing what you're doing, then we wouldn't have as big a problem. So, it's just a matter of mobilizing lots of folks in a broad social movement, really, to start to address these issues and to become confident enough about the proposition that we can make progress, that people think it's worthwhile to tolerate the stress of having these conversations. Okay, if they think of bringing these issues up is just for the sake of bringing them up, we're not going to do anything about it, it's embarrassment with no payoff, then there's a lot of resentment and resistance. On the other hand, if it's not embarrassment with no payoff, but it's working on something we think we can actually make progress on, we're not stuck here, but we got to talk about it if we're going to fix it, then we get past it. And it's not about worrying about the stigma and the embarrassment. It's about getting to work and addressing these things. Okay, and that's sort of where I am on these things. I mean, because for a lot of black folks in particular, they're just tired of being embarrassed and tired of being made to feel bad and made to feel like they didn't do a good job on stuff. And it's hurtful. And I haven't figured out exactly the right way to talk about it and the right way to approach it, but I think we need to. I mean, one mother told me, she said, don't tell me all this stuff that makes me feel bad. Just tell me what I need to be doing. She said, I did everything they told me to do with my kids. She said, you didn't tell me I was supposed to be talking to them while I was reading to them. She said, if I'm reading a story and the kid wants to say something, I say, shut up, I'm reading. It's not about saying, what do you think about this? What do you think is going to happen next? Or what do you... And so people have done, particularly folks in the suburbs, they work their butts off to buy those houses in the suburbs and to send their kids to these schools that they've always heard were the best schools in the state. And so they get there, they think, I've arrived, they hand their kids over. They don't know all these dense social networks that are operating in the background among the white folks and all the extra things that they're doing with their kid. They just think this school system does wonders for your kids. But it doesn't. They trust the schools too much to get it done, and they don't know all the things that they might do to supplement what the schools are doing. And so one of the questions strategically with these things is, well, is it enough to go in and just suggest to people all the things we need to be doing without telling them some of this stuff that might be embarrassing to hear? Okay? Or they just tune you out because you haven't shocked them into paying any attention. My sense is we need to shock people a bit into paying attention in order to get the conversation going and in order to get people thinking hard enough and willing to tolerate a bit of stress in changing lifestyles in the direction they need to change. That if we don't put the stress on, we won't get the change. But which also means that those of us who want to deliver the message have to also be prepared to tolerate the stress and to help people manage the stress. Too much stress kills the organism. So we can do a lot of damage with not much good. We just go out and impose stress willy-nilly without being careful. On the other hand, not enough stress leaves the system at rest, and you don't get any change. And so trying to figure out how to manage this for all the kinds of folks that we need to say, we know you're working hard, we know you think you're doing your best, but it's not good enough. We need to say that to teachers, we need to say that to parents, we need to say that to researchers who are trying to work on these issues, to all of us who have roles to play in trying to get this done. So I'll just, without showing you any more pictures now, because I'm going to leave some time, 15 minutes for us to interact. On the youth culture piece, the bottom line is that we do not find big racial differences in how much kids care about doing well in school. But we do find racial differences in behavior of the type that can lead to racial differences in how well school goes. Okay? It appears that there are the big differences at the youth level are skill differences and youth culture differences. Okay, black kids hold one another accountable for some behavior patterns that don't serve them well in school, and often which none of the black kids may really want to be in, but none of them individually have the power to break the pattern. Imagine 5 black males at a high school walking slowly to class, not fast enough. They're going to get there 4 minutes late. Each one of them individually wants to be at class on time, but they're kind of sauntering coolly down the hallway. Does any one of the 4 break rank and rush up and get to class on time? Okay? Probably not, even though all 4 of them want to be there. So you can have patterns in behavior among kids that none of them really like, but they're all holding one another accountable. Because any one of them is going to crack on one who jumped, oh, you're going to be a goody two-shoes today, huh? You think you're going to get an apple or something you get there on time? You can't hang with us. Get out of here. Or some just various kinds of ways they give each other a hard time. And each one of them will do that, even though they themselves don't really like the regime that they're stuck in. And so we have to operate in ways that allow kids to use us as their excuse for why they have to do it the right way. We have to put enough stress on them for doing the wrong thing. And there are some teachers who know how to do that, who do it really well, who kids really work hard for. There are other teachers where if the teacher's not strong enough and the kids know we can get over on this teacher and we can play around, goof off in class, and so on, they'll hold one another accountable for taking advantage of the teacher in that way. And a lot of that's not racial. White kids do it too. Okay? But anyway, there are a number of different fronts here that we need to work, a number of different ways we need to hold one another accountable. So why don't I just stop and open it up for folks? You had your hand up earlier. I put you off for a while.
This is when you had brought about hip-hop and a couple other things started.
And please, let me just ask that hip-hop not be the only thing we talk about. So this is our hip-hop question. Let's let the other... Now, I know from experience, hip-hop will dominate the conversation if we let it.
This is not about that. Because
Okay.
other things were going on at the same time.
Right.
Closely about the same time. Resegregation of schools is one. Another is increasing income gap.
People have looked at all these things.
Pardon?
I said people have looked carefully. There's an industry of folks trying to figure this out, and none of those things do it. There was not anything special happening with income around that time to give you a corner in the data. This is a corner in a national data series. The resegregation wasn't changing that rapidly at that time, and there's not much evidence that it makes much difference to achievement anyway. Okay, and so...
But the fact is that we have more blacks and browns going to really poor schools, and there is a lot of...
No, that's not the fact. I mean, there's not any clear trend around that time where all of a sudden you dumped a lot more black kids in the poor schools.
Right.
There's a gradual trend to where we start to phase out the desegregation orders and you start to get some growing segregation, but the timing doesn't really match up. I mean, Gary Orfield makes this point, but the timing doesn't work.
But do you expect a very sudden shift? Do you expect a lag effect? So if...
No, but the effect started, the thing that happened first was the test score stopped rising. And remember it was located in that one birth cohort that really collapsed. Pardon?
Desegregation, resegregation, which began, I believe, in the late 70s and early 80s.
Right.
You'd expect a lag effect, whereas some kids would, have a continued increase.
The other thing I'm telling you is desegregation did not improve test results that much. In the studies that we do to look at how much difference it makes that the classrooms are racially mixed, you get not much effect on math. You get about a quarter standard deviation effect with big changes in mixing on reading over a period of years. People think it's mostly due to just different language environment you're embedded in. The recent findings on the moving to opportunity find that for the males it actually hurts to move kids into the more integrated communities. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's a new paper by Carolyn Hoxby that was just delivered a couple weeks ago at a seminar where she finds that you do best when you're put into a new setting where the kids are kind of like you or a little bit better than you, but if they're too much better than you, it actually hurts your achievement. There's a lot of nuance to it, and it's not the clear effect that you might expect it to do. I mean, I have a paper where we review a fair amount of this stuff. It's I can give you the reference later if you want it. There's some other folks that have. I mean, there are people who religiously believe it makes a big difference. And I can name those people for you, but read what they've written and see if you see the evidence in the writing. Okay, there are papers that have titles that will indicate to you that they show the big effect, positive effect of segregation, but actually read the paper and see what it says. The evidence is not there.
Well, then can I ask you another
Yes,
question
go on.
about, and I'm sorry, it does relate to hip-hop.
Right.
I mean,
Go on.
you
Go on.
put
Go
that
on.
off the cuff.
All right, go on.
But
Yeah.
there's no comparable evidence that this particular cultural
Right.
phenomenon has anything to do with what kids do in school and read.
So you can make me show you more evidence. No, there is evidence. I'm telling you the kind of evidence there is. The time use thing, there's a lot of evidence, a fair amount of evidence, that leisure reading outside of school, is one of the sources of growth in reading skills. It's just time on task in reading skills, right? And so there's lots of different kinds of studies show additional time on task adds to skills. And so part of what we're talking about is reduction of time on task in leisure reading. Okay, there are some other very interesting random assignment stuff that goes beyond the time use stuff that randomly assigns kids to different groups to listen to music, and then they have case discussions with them. They debrief them right after they've listened to the music. They started these kinds of studies with heavy metal rock and found that the group that was randomly assigned to listen to the heavy metal rock, when debriefed, were more inclined to condone the use of violence and problem solving. Well, with the best study I found that does this with hip hop, right after they listen to the hip hop, they find if it's once say it's gangster rap, regular rap, and then nothing, basically. The kids who just listen to the gangster rap are more likely to agree to condone the use of violence than the ones who listen to the other two, but that's not the main point here. The main point is there are also kids who listen to either form of rap were more pessimistic about prospects for success in mainstream society. There's a vignette about a kid who comes home from school, gets picked up at the bus station by a friend in an expensive car. The friend said, "Man, you're wasting your time up in school. Why don't you come out here with me? You make more money than you're ever going to make even after you graduate." And then the discussion among the kids is how optimistic are you that the young man who's in college will realize his dream to become a doctor or lawyer or whatever it was. The kids who listened to either form of rap were more pessimistic by a statistically significant margin after they've done this. Black kids' engagement and immersion in this culture is deeper than white or Latino kids. Let's see if I go in the right direction here. Let me get out of here. Black kids are the only group whose self-esteem is tightly linked to how deeply engaged they are with the music. And I'll just show you a bunch of really good culture stuff I just have time to do. Here, this is the statement was hip-hop music plays an important part of my life. And they could say always, usually, sometimes, usually not, or never. They use the standard self-esteem scale for I'm a person of worth and those kinds of questions. We get black kids who never listen to hip-hop have the lowest self-esteem. Then it goes up from there to there to there to there to there, just a basic, straight, linear thing. And then we get whites, Hispanics, and Asians. It just is not that big a deal in here. I mean, the degree to which it really has grabbed them appears to be greater here. And even black kids with rock music. I mean, rock music is definitively not black to black folks, often. Okay? If you're into rock music, you're just not one of us, kind of thing. All the black folks in the room are shaking their head yes as I say that. And so here, this is the diagram for rock music. We get the black kids with the highest self-esteem when I graph it opposite rock music are the ones who never listen to rock music. You see here the highest bar down here at the lowest end. Then as they listen to rock music, self-esteem falls. And then it comes back up some at the other extreme. So the black kids who always listen to rock music, they fit in with the white kids, so they aren't totally lost. They got a place to be. Black kids who sometimes, they're kind of in a no man's land in the middle, this kind of not fitting socially. And the ones who never listen are up here. And so even with them, the whites, Hispanics, and Asians, there's not much of a relationship there. But for the black kids, this relationship to their culture, to the pop music stuff, seems to be encompassing enough for them that it's related, it's linked to their self-esteem. Now, I acknowledge there's not a lot of research that makes the tight, direct link to achievement. And even during this period, I told you the time on homework doesn't change much. Okay? I'm sorry, it's a leisure time kind of thing, and what you're preoccupied with, and whether you're cutting class, not, and what all your friends are talking about. And again, and I'm not claiming at all that it's proof. I'm just saying it's an interesting coincidence where you can tell a story where when you find a new piece to the puzzle, it usually fits.
But
as
it
you go
could be
through
an
that.
effect rather than a cause. Like
Pardon?
It could be an effect rather than
What
a
could be an
cause.
effect? Oh, I can back up. I can tell you a story where rap music is the effect. It's not the cause. But, I mean, rap music, the crack cocaine epidemic started in 1984. Okay? A lot of the kids who were engaged in the street drug trade of the crack cocaine epidemic are some of the voices that you later hear expressing themselves in gangster rap. Why was the community so vulnerable to gangster rap, to the crack cocaine epidemic? Well, for 300 years of suppression and white supremacy. You can blame it. You can back up and distribute the blame. The reason it's interesting and might have implications now is that if we're trying to reach young people to affect their lifestyle and the intellectual angles and inclinations in their lifestyles, we need to be able to connect with them. This is very much what they are connected with now. And most of us, particularly older adults, are ignorant about it. We were so turned off by it that we ignored it, and now we can't talk to them in a way that makes sense and have them tune us in. Although some people are doing some very interesting work in this vein, using it as a way to reach kids. And so the hip-hop piece I hesitate even to put in here sometimes because it kind of grabs people's attention. The main point of the story was to say we made huge progress over 20 years, and it's plausible we can make it again. People then ask, well, why did progress stop? And this is one direction to take the conversation. But, like here.
I was interested in if you knew anything about technological changes and how that might affect. Because I also remember that time period where more people were getting home computers, video games were becoming more prevalent.
People always ask me about video
that's
games.
Great.
There is, video games might be part of the story. Now, the other piece of MTV refused to put hip-hop on until October 1988, and then it exploded out when they put it on. So that, the whole explosion, all the hip-hop stuff was 88 to 92, the real spin out, and it was the teenage years of this particular birth cohort. So, but the video game piece, I just heard that there's one nationally representative data set that does have a question about time on video games. I didn't know that was in there. And so and somebody who started to look at that found the kids who spend more time with video games had lower scores, weren't doing as well in school. So that could be part of it, although I'm guessing that, I don't know, my guess would be that white kids were spending as much or more time on video games than black kids. But I don't know. Yes?
I was interested when you refer to the achievement gap, and you also made reference to the achievement gap that we see even when children begin kindergarten.
Yeah.
What about those children who are scoring equally in elementary school, and then we see an achievement gap going into the 4th, 5th grade that grows from that. Is that a separate issue, or is that the same?
It's, first of all, that people's impression, some people talk about the 4th grade failure syndrome or some. There's a mistaken impression of what the facts are on that. That was promoted by Juanza Kunjufu's stuff, the conspiracy to destroy black boys. He's got a table in there where he shows this big drop-off that starts after 3rd grade. I think it's based on one school or something. And black folks around the country read that, and everybody's talking about all this 3rd grade failure syndrome, where all of a sudden after 3rd grade it starts to open up. Okay, we don't have a representative national sample that tracks kids all the way through, so we couldn't even really know what the pattern is. The best evidence that has tried to patch together different data series so we can try to see if there's a particular school year where it really starts to expand rapidly does not find a particular threshold year. It's just kind of a steady increase in the gap over time. There is a change. I mean, people talk about the transition from learning to read to reading to learn that happens as you move from 3rd into 4th grade. But just in terms of test score measures, it doesn't look like there's a real special threshold. Now, when kids change schools, there is a temporary drop, and it could persist longer in that transition year. Okay? And so, and it always bothers me when I hear one of these school systems got kids changing schools every 2 years. Because they just pile those drops on top of each other. This she's wants to follow up.
Yeah, follow up on that, because I agree. I was not able to really find supporting evidence of large-scale research when it came to this achievement gap that started in the middle school years.
Yeah.
However,
there's one chapter in here that's probably the best one that tries to patch together the time series. It's by one of the Meredith Phillips chapters.
I was just going to make reference to here in just in Nashville. There's, because I'm not from here, the school systems here have an academic magnet system whereby students have to qualify for these schools, and the interesting pattern at this point seems to be those African American males that qualify for these schools in grades and scores equivalent to every other subgroup is failing out of those only 3 schools, but all 3 of them have the same problem. And at the end, by graduation, there are very few black males that are graduating out of that system. So if they can qualify,
black males do not assimilate well into the high track, is what I'm starting to see some. We find that one study found that the black girls that move up with the high track kids, some of this is anecdotal and some of it's based on survey stuff I've done, but we could do more to nail what I'm saying, but this is my understanding of it right now. The black girls seem to assimilate pretty well, either with the white kids at the high-level schools, or they form their own black female clique. Okay, so there's a small social clique of high-achieving black females that give one another social support. Okay, or they integrate and assimilate with the white kids and get accepted in. So they've got the social support they fit. The black males, on the other hand, do not assimilate well. They still stay connected socially with the non-high achievers, or with the rank-and-file black males. So if you look in a survey how the high-achieving black males answer the questions about social stuff, their answers to the social questions look like the black kids' answers, the other black kids' answers to the social questions. The high-achieving black females' answers to the social questions look like the white kids' answers to the social questions. Okay? So the black male doesn't fit with the high-achieving white males because they're just differences about what it means to be a black male versus what it means to be a white male that doesn't just... And the other thing is that males... there's a study by a guy at UCLA that finds that white males have, and maybe just primates generally, if there's a dominant group of males, in preserving their position of dominance, they subordinate and suppress other males from other groups. The dominant male group is not threatened by the other female groups, but they're threatened by other groups of males. So they make it clear. They find ways to make it clear who's on top here. okay, and black males socializing to demand respect, the hell with you, or kind of thing. Or, some of the words I could just use now wouldn't be polite to use in this company in the kind of way that people would discuss that feeling when you're in there and white males are making sure you know your place. Okay? And if that dynamic could be part of what sometimes goes on. The other thing is it's just such a high value placed by black males on being accepted by the other black males, on being one of the other black males, that's who you want to hang with. And that's not reinforcing your high achievement piece. And
so what's the dynamic that's supporting the female black success? Break away from this.
The females don't. The black high achieving females don't have as high a stake in staying in the middle center with the other black females. Is what I've been in the informal conversations we have. So they get pushed out of the peer group. The black high-achieving females are not still part of the rank-and-file black group, except to the degree that they are physically attractive and the boys take them back in. Okay? So they'll be there as a guest, so to speak, of the regular rank-and-file boy who's taking them back in to the clique with the others. Otherwise, they're over here in their clique of high-achieving black females, or they just assimilate it, because the white kids accept them with the females. There's not that same power, macho kind of dynamic between the females as there is between the males.
So you were talking about these quadrants in the high health and high perfectionism. Do you see any kind of relation, or have you looked at any kind of relationship between cultures, dominant cultures in the class, and teachers' understanding of those cultures?
I am not finding racial differences in the degree to which kids report support from their teachers. Okay? And so if they say the teacher's bad, they all say the teacher's bad. Okay? If they say our teacher loves to help us, they all say our teacher loves to help us. Once in a while, you'll find an isolated classroom where you'll find the white kids are way up here and the black kids are way down here in terms of whether they have that rapport with the teacher. But you also find the opposite. You'll find some suburban schools that are really good schools. The black kids feel more supported than the white kids do. In some data I'm analyzing right now, the kids who feel least supported are the low SES white kids. Okay, the white blue-collar kid in a white-collar school. Because they're not on anybody's radar screen. Often, and among minority groups, the kids who feel worst are the Pacific Islanders, the Native Americans, and the Arabs. If you look at who's alienated, it's the brown kids who don't fit. There are about 2 or 3 or 4 of them in every school. Okay, they just don't fit any of the categories, so they're much more alienated than the black kids are. Okay, you had your hand up a second.
Well,
or are you just going to give me the hook or something?
No. I have a kind of a comment type question. My reading of it is that if the achievement gap increases over the K-12 schools.
Yeah, and Meredith's estimate is about half of it's there in standard deviation terms. Half of it's there at kindergarten, and the other half opens up by 12th grade.
Yeah, but
that's one measure.
That don't show that big of a change.
The metric matters too.
It's a methodologically tough thing.
Right.
But there's a pretty big gap. I mean, there's like if you do on the Peabody picture vocabulary for little 4 and 5-year-olds, there's like a standard deviation gap.
Yeah.
So if there is an increase, it's a long way from being the whole.
Yep.
The second thing is, my reading is that to the extent that there is a gap increase, it may happen more during summertime when kids aren't in school than while they're in school. I'm just saying that's my reading of the literature. Is that your reading as well? And what
it's mixed. The summer learning loss differences. I know Roland Fryer, with using the ECLS, says he finds no racial difference in summer learning loss.
But there's another guy, his name escapes me, who's done like a meta-analysis of 39 studies, which finds that.
I don't have a position on it. I don't know. I mean,
it's like, well, what they find is, I feel like there's that Baltimore study, which is basically no difference in growth during the academic year.
Yeah, right.
And a difference in
Yeah. I think I would need to see a researcher who I really trusted go through all of it and sort it out and just tell me what the answer is. Because I've seen enough differences in what the answer is not being agnostic about it. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that time at home is equally effective for kids from these different backgrounds who are doing different amounts of leisure reading or getting different amounts of sleep, who have different amounts of intellectual conversation at home. It seems like time at home has to be not as productive as for some as others. During the school year, whether you get equal changes across the school by race really depends on how you're measuring achievement. As you say, there's some new work out that Dick Murney has a new study where he gets a different answer if he uses standard deviation as a metric as versus scaled scores as a metric for whether the thing is widening or not.
But your comment reminds me again of the class size effects. You'll say, geez, you're all over the single bound here. But you get an effect, but basically you get an effect in the first year, and then it just maintains itself.
Right.
Whereas you would think you'd keep getting another effect.
Well, we don't know we don't know, in the Tennessee class size star experiment, we don't know if we needed to keep kids in small classes through the end of third grade in order to maintain the effect.
To maintain it, but what I'm saying is
yeah.
you don't see,
you don't see it getting bigger and bigger in standard deviation terms.
These things are in place over time, and I'm saying, well, when you put class size in place over time, it doesn't seem to have an increasing.
In standard deviation units, if we looked in raw numbers of things kids understand, it would be increasing because the standard deviations are capturing bigger and bigger amounts of knowledge. And the class size, I mean, I have a strong stake. I used to have a stake in that, but I'm willing to believe anything on the class size stuff. But because I know teachers vary so much that teacher quality is the number one piece of it. If you go and sit in classrooms in any elementary school, or even the surveys, we have huge differences within school in the degree to which the kids' responses indicate that their teachers are effective. And if you go sit in classrooms, you see big differences in how effective teachers seem to be within schools. And it's a daunting challenge, but we need to face it, to trying to get the folks who are average and below to find ways to be more effective in the classroom. Is your hand up?
Yeah, on that line. Do you have any correlation data between these categorizations of teachers in terms of high support, high expectations, and in children's performance in any measures?
We have not yet been able to match their test scores in with these. I want to do that. I've asked some elementary districts to do it, but it's not their top priority to pull that together right now. But I have every expectation that I will find that effect when I do look at that. I mean, kids, I think, probably do know whether they did their best work all year. Okay? And I find a very strong pattern with regard to whether they think they did their best. It's only in that one kind of classroom by the end of the year they say they did their best, and I would expect to find bigger. I'll be really surprised if when I match it in, I don't get big achievement gains. No, it is. It would be nice to know, and that's on the to-do agenda.
I want everybody, we're at the end of our time. I want everybody to feel comfortable to leave now. If some of you have a few more questions,
I'm here.
A couple more minutes. Let's give him a hand for